Hey guys, OGalbina here, bringing you guys our next Draft League typing tier list. Today, we're going to be going over the fighting type. One of my personal favorite typings in Draft League, honestly. There's so many incredible Pokemon on this list, it's absolutely crazy. There's really not that many terrible ones, so yeah, if you guys do enjoy today's tier list video, be sure to drop a like on the video, as well as subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 3,000 subscribers, and I would really appreciate it if you help me out along that journey, as well as checking out, maybe becoming a member, looking at that little join button down there, seeing if there's any perks that you'd enjoy. And yeah, with that being said, we can kind of just jump right into it. Like I said, the fighting type is probably, at this point, maybe even especially this generation, my personal favorite typing in Draft League. There is so many incredible fighting types in the Paldea decks. It is absolutely insane. Honestly, it's flabbergasting how good this typing is in this meta, especially with so little fairies in the format. They really can run rampant, and I feel like I'm going to have more S-tier Pokemon and A-tier Pokemon in this tier list than I have in any other tier list, which is going to be pretty darn crazy. Just to give a little bit of a scope and example, I have 30 fighting types on this tier list. When we did the fairy one, we only had 20, and some of those were super big stretches on like viability and things like that, so there's definitely some really cool Pokemon in this tier list, and I'm super excited to, you know, kind of show you guys what's going on. So, and that being said, I think we can kind of just jump into it, and number one is going to be a Pokemon that's gained some viability this generation in Primeape. Now, I think Primeape's going to sit either here in the bottom of C tier, you know, as we start adding things, or the top of D tier. I'm going to say bottom of C tier right now, because it does have some insane Mickey potential, and by that I mean like doing like mini annihilate things with bulk up plus rage fist plus its fighting stab, because ghost plus fighting is just honestly the best offensive typing of all time. So giving it both of those coverage moves as well as bulk up alongside that Eviolite, making it really bulky just like Annihilate, can honestly make it pretty obnoxious, but it also can access to Stealth Rock this generation. It can U-turn. Defiant is an incredible ability. So this Pokemon really isn't that terrible, honestly. I really don't think it's that bad. So we're going to go ahead and put it in C tier. Now, next up we have the three Tauruses, and we can kind of tier these guys somewhat together. I'm going to put Tauros Paldea regular here in D tier, and then I'm going to put the other two up in B tier. The reason I have the other one down here in D tier is because when these two exist, there really isn't a huge reason to draft Tauros Paldea like regular. It doesn't offer much. I mean, it is Intim, but it's kind of mediocre otherwise. Coverage-wise, it's kind of mediocre. A bunch of things like that, whereas the Water and the Fireball are incredible Pokemon. Kachu is a pretty cool ability, but this thing's bread and butter is going to be Intimidate variants, and it really is a lot more versatile than a lot of people think. Bulk up sets are incredible. They both have access to Trailblaze. Well, I know Water has access to Trailblaze, and I know Fire has access to Flame Charge, so they can boost their speed in that way. Raging Bull is a really cool stab option for both of them, either being Water or Fire, and breaking screens while not hurting them like Wave Crash or Flare Blitz would, but those are incredibly strong as well on especially Choice Band variants, or Assault Vest variants are also really good on this Pokemon. I've seen Rocky Helmet Rest Talk variants. Will-O-Wisp on Paldea and Tauros Blaze is also a great tool. These Pokemon have proven to be incredibly versatile, and I think it is really cool to see Tauros become relevant again, become really viable in the Draft League format. Now, regular Tauros is still a great Pokemon as a low tier like Breaker. It's a Pokemon I've used a ton myself, but it doesn't even come close to stacking up to these two, and I really want to try both of them in a league upcoming soon. We'll see if I end up finding the opportunity and the means to, but they look really fun, and I know everybody has had a blast using them, so hopefully I get the opportunity to do so. Next up, we have Galarian Zapdos, who just recently made his return in Pokemon Home. I'm going to put this Pokemon up here. It's either going to be the top of A tier or top of A tier or bottom of S tier. I think for now, I'm going to put it in S tier. I really love this Pokemon. I think it has actually some pretty incredible potential with Terra. And even if it's just tearing into its stab options and Brave Bird, and flying plus fighting, it's really tough to switch into this Pokemon. I think Fire could be a really viable option on it as well. This thing is so unbelievably strong. It U-turns around forever. Defiant is a great tool. I love bulk up variants as well, allowing it to, you know, kind of get a little bit stronger and things like that, which is great. I believe it got access to Trailblaze this generation as well. I'm not 100% sure. Let me check that, actually. I'm very curious to see if Zapdos Galar got access to Trailblaze. It did get access to Trailblaze, so it can boost its speed in that way, which is pretty darn cool. I also think, like, bulk up, like, acrobatic sets can be cool with no item or like a way of getting rid of your item, which can definitely be really awesome. It really is an incredible Pokemon. Taunt is a great option. Thunderous Kick is very, very spammable as well. Being able to guarantee defense drop something on the switch in is really, really annoying for a lot of teams to deal with. Blaze Kick is a cool option. I actually don't know if it kept Blaze Kick though, to be completely honest. But, yeah, great Pokemon overall. Really, really like me some Zapdos. Next up, we have a Pokemon that I personally absolutely love, and I'm trying to think of where I want to put him. I think I'm going to put him in A tier. I think I'm going to put Heracross here. It's probably bottom A tier, top B tier, depending on who you are. But man, you want to talk about a wall breaker incarnate. That is this Pokemon right here. This thing is so incredibly strong with a gut set between its dual stab of Bug and Fighting on top of Facade. Really not much switches in, especially when you take into conjunction that it can Swords Dance, and even if you don't have the speed tier or the ability to run a gut set in a week, Moxie Scarf Heracross is also just an absolutely insane cleaner and can be such a good Pokemon in an endgame. In Generation 8, it got access to Spikes as well, which it did keep in Generation 9, so it's a great Spike setter in the sense that it does force very specific switches. A lot of the time, though, with Heracross, I feel like you're much better off just attacking the switch in with a prediction like a Facade or something, but if you do need Spikes guaranteed, it's a great Spiker in that way. And there are some niche interactions in which it can be pretty bulky and annoying, so it's really not the worst Pokemon in the world. Defensively as well, just due to that typing and things like that. Now, the 4x weakness of flying is tough, but most teams should have a good flying resist, so hopefully yours does as well. Next up, we have Braylum. I'm going to go ahead and put Braylum at the top of B tier. As much as I really want to put him in A tier because I love him personally, I think it's kind of stuck in B tier, mostly due to that speed tier being a little bit mediocre with that base 70 and the rest of its bulk being kind of mid. But its typing, incredible. Grass Fighting is really solid. It has two great abilities, one being Poison Heal. Like Leech Seed Poison Heal sets are really, really good alongside like Self-Focus Punch and things like that. But especially Technician sets in conjunction with Spore, and then you have your Mach Punch, your Bullet Seed, your Rock Tomb, your Bulldoze this gen, which is a great buff to it, and then your strong close combat that you got access to this generation as well. On top of Swords Dance, if you can find that opportunity to set it up, this Pokemon is an absolute nuke. Such a strong Pokemon. We used it in our most recent BBR season. We had double fighting with this and Great Tusk, and it was such a fun core to use. I loved using Braylum, and it really saved us in a ton of games with its offensive utility and its priority. I think priority this generation is so huge and so important because of the fact that there is so much like Terra Cheese potential and things set up and get out of hand and things like that. Having that strong Mach Punch is really valuable. So I'm really, really big on Braylum personally. I'm going to keep it towards B tier, but I really do think it's an incredible one. Next up, we have Hariyama, which is another great low-tier fighting. I'm going to put it in C tier here, but this thing is no joke, man. Whether it be AV sets with either Guts or Thick Fat, this Pokemon can be incredibly bulky and incredibly obnoxious. Bulk up sets are definitely very, very solid, and I think, did it finally get access? It finally got access to Drain Punch this generation, which I don't believe it had before, which is absolutely amazing for it. It has great coverage in Drain Punch / Close Combat. It gets Fake Out and Bullet Punch for priority, Heavy Slam and Poison Jab for, you know, opposing fairy types and things like that. It kept knockoff as well, I believe. Yeah, those big mitts can knock off, which is incredibly valuable in a Generation 9 format. On top of having, what was the last coverage move? Elemental Punches? Did I say Elemental Punches? I hope I did. But Rock Slide, you know, a ton of different things. This Pokemon really is incredibly solid. Now, it does kind of lack in the means of reliable recovery, and it really does require you to know how to EV with, you know, base 144 HP. You're really not going to invest in that much, but if you're not in, you know, distribute things between your attack, defense, and speed def well, this thing is going to be really tough to take down one hit. It's going to be a great blanket check to a lot of Pokemon, as well as an incredible breaker with Guts and Flame Orb, especially under Trick Room too. If you can get this like a Slowking or Slowking Galar and Chilly Reception after Trick Rooming, get into that Hariyama and just click a damn button, you are going to be in for a great, great time. So I'm definitely big on Hariyama. Next up is one of my personal favorite fighting types, mostly because of its Mega, but honestly, it's a Pokemon I personally thought was going to be great in the pre-home meta, and it really wasn't in Metacham. This Pokemon is very strong. Psychic Fighting is an incredible stab combination, especially when you take on top of that the pure power boost that it does get, making that base 60 attack a little bit stronger than you'd think, doubling that attack stat. So with an Adamant Nature, instead of having, let's see, 240 attack, you would double that into 480, which is very, very strong. For, you know, reference, let's see what Braylum hits. Braylum hits 394 with an adamant nature, whereas Medicham would hit, double of 240, which again I think is 480 if I know how to math correctly. But this Pokemon, again, incredibly strong. It's just so middling bulk wise and so middling speed tier wise. It's very hard to position. It's kind of forced into scarf sets, which can be very limiting at times, and one, make it easier to pivot around, but two, kind of lack the power that it would want if it could go Life Orb or Banded or something like that. Now if it could go Banded too, if you're playing a slower team, Banded Medicham is an absolute nuke. Same thing with Life Orb. Fake Apple's Bullet Punch is priority as well. And basically, like, very similar coverage to Hariyama, maybe a little bit less, but very similar coverage. This Pokemon is incredibly strong, incredibly potent if you can position it. It's just very hard to position, so I am going to put it in C tier here. Next up, we have Lucario. I gotta put Lucario in A tier. Lucario is a mixed bag for me, right? Because in generations prior, I've used in Generation 8 especially, and I felt it functioned best as a breaker with like Life Orb, 4 attacks, because it was very hard to find an opportunity to set up. But now with terrestrializing, you can find much more of an opportunity, especially if you Terra into normal, you get up that Swords Dance, and then you E-speed through everything. It's like a mini Dragonite in that regard. Or Terra Steel, I think, is incredible with strong Meteor Mashes and Bullet Punch on top of your close combat. But it's great as a wall breaker. It doesn't have to just set up, and I think that's kind of where people are falling short with Lucario this generation. I think those mixed sets are really, really good. Its special attack is actually higher than its attack stat. Like, this thing is really, really strong if you can position it correctly. It's just its middling bulk and its mid speed tier kind of hold it back a little bit. But man, as a pure wall breaker, maybe on some webs offense or maybe against just a slower team, this Pokemon is an absolute nuke and can be very, very difficult to deal with. So I think I'm going to put Lucario up here in A tier. Next up, we have Toxicroak. Toxicroak is going to go... for me, it's going to go in C tier, right behind Hariyama. It's a Pokemon I have used and I've enjoyed a lot. I love having... Oh my gosh, there we go. I love having the water immunity. It's actually very solid on rain with dry skin. The extra fire weakness is tough, but there's not a lot of fire types in the game, and there's not a lot of fire type coverage a lot of the time, so I feel like it's not the biggest deal in the world. No, I'm drinking some coffee. I just woke up. But whether it be Swords Dance variants, Nasty Plot variants, it is a grounded poison, which is always valuable, and it can spread toxics around, which I think is actually very valuable in this generation. 85 base speed isn't the worst thing in the world, and its bulk is pretty bad, but again, if you can position it well, I think it's definitely a very solid Pokemon. It has great priority options in Vacuum Wave and Sucker Punch, which are both very, very solid on both sides. Like I said, you can set up on both sides. You're a great mixed attacker. Life Orb sets are incredible, and even like, Shuka Berry and things like that, like different resist berries, so that you can find that opportunity to set up is nice, because you do have elemental punches as well that you could rock out with, so definitely a very good Pokemon. Next up, we have Gallade. Gallade's got to go up here in A tier, man. This Pokemon had a come up this generation, getting a whole new ability. I almost called it what do you call it? Radical Red calls it, like Blade Master. But Sharpness is so strong in this Pokemon. Between Sacred Sword, Psycho Cut, X-Scissor, Night Slash. Like, there's so many different options for this Pokemon to rock out with those cutting moves that get an insane boost. Sacred Sword becomes a stronger close combat without any downside. It only benefits because you go through defense boosts and things like that. Like, this Pokemon is so unbelievably strong. It has an incredible speed stat, so you can find those opportunities to Swords Dance or bulk up if you need to. It does get priority in Shadow Sneak, and even gets cool moves like Will-O-Wisp. Like, Gallade has a lot more utility than people give it credit for. I think this Pokemon is really, really good and can be very difficult to deal with for a lot of teams. I really like Gallade a lot. Shout out to 7-point Gallade in BBR. Oops. But really great Pokemon for sure. Okay, next up, we have Hisuian Lilligant. I'm going to put it at the top of A tier, solely off of not 100% knowing how I feel about it yet. Just because I think this Pokemon having access to physical Quiver Dance is pretty darn incredible. It's a really cool skill set for it to have, especially with Grass and Fighting Stab. Alongside Terra, I think like Terra Fire sets and Terra Ground sets are going to be very difficult for a lot of teams to deal with. It does have access to Chlorophyll, so it can function well into the sun, or having access to Hustle, which makes it very, very difficult to switch into, but a little bit less reliable. So you kind of have to give and take a little bit where you go from there. I think with Terra, this thing is incredible. I think it's a bit mediocre if it is not a Terra captain on a draft league team. So that's kind of why I have it in a middling area right here, not quite S tier, because I don't think it's going to function very well without that Terra boost. Either giving it a third stab or like making its Fighting Stab or Grass Stab like incredibly strong, but I don't know. That's me. I think it's definitely a very good Pokemon, but I don't know if it's quite S tier yet. I need to see more people use it before I give it such high praise, I suppose is the way I want to say it. Okay, next up we have Chestnut. I'm personally going to put Chestnut, let's put it at the bottom of B tier. I might end up moving that around a little bit, but looking ahead, I think that's about fair for Chestnut to be bottom of B. Incredible Pokemon this generation, or very good Pokemon this generation. If it's incredible, it'd be at least A tier. But very good Pokemon this generation. Obviously, it's a bit slow and it has some pretty glaring weakness with grass and fighting. It's very bulky on the physical defensive side especially. Bulletproof is a solid ability, giving it some pretty cool immunities and forcing some awkward interactions in prep. Like against a Gengar or something like that, forcing it to run Psychic for you is obviously pretty nice, especially because it can't Sludge Wave this generation. But getting access to Body Press this gen, being its first Gen 9 game, is incredible for Chestnut. Like Iron Defense Body Press sets are going to be very annoying. It got access to Trailblaze, which is really cool for the Belly Drum variants that you might want to run. On top of that, though, running like Rocky Helmet plus Spiky Shield and Spikes is just going to be so reliable so many times. It's a great catch-all physical check to so many different Pokemon as well. Very solid defensive utility as long as you have those Flying Resist and Ice Resist and things like that. Obviously, there are a lot of typings that Grass and Fighting can be weak to, but it also has some very, very good resistances. In particular, being one of the best, if not the best, Edgequake response in the game in Chestnut is really good for it. So, yeah. Next up, we have Halucha, and this might be a hot take. I think Halucha is a B tier Pokemon. I'm actually gonna put it behind Braylum, personally. No, I think Halucha has like insane Mickey potential. It is a noob killer if I've ever seen one. But one, the lack of terrain in this generation, and two, the predictability and like the ability to really prep for this thing well, if you know what you're doing. I have never seen a good player get hooked by an unburdened Swords Dance Halucha. At least not in a long time. I don't know. Once people kind of figured out what it did. Now, obviously, if like the Layla or if the Tapus came back in the game, this thing would be much better. But I think like the combination of its like noob killery like reputation on top of like no terrain being in the game, besides Rillaboom, who's super mediocre now, I think I'm gonna put it in B tier personally. I don't know. That's just me, at least. That's just me. Okay, next up we have Persimmy. Persimmy here is going to go, I believe, I'm gonna put Persimmy in C tier. Behind Hariyama. Really, really solid, like, low-tier pivoting fighting type. Like, one that can come in, click U-turn, get in and out. Kind of functions similar to Zapdos, just much worse in the sense that it is a defiant fighting type with U-turn that's going to be choiced a lot of the time, and punish hazard removal. It doesn't do so as well because it's not as fast and it's not as strong, but for its price point, it's really not that bad in that regard. And again, it can be very strong. It has good coverage, close combat, gunk shot, seed bomb, earthquake, U-turn, like we said. Cool things like that. I think Assault Vest is also a very solid set, and Bulk Up variants can obviously do some work as well. And it kept access to Knockoff, which is, again, a really big boost to it. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in C tier here. Again, kind of does what, you know, Zapdos does, just a little bit worse. Not a little bit, a lot of bit worse. That's just me, though. Okay, next up we have Predominable. I'm going to go ahead and put it in D tier. We don't need to talk about Predominable, man. This thing sucks. Unfortunately, just having such a slow speed tier with the ice typing makes it to where that dual stab combo being so strong doesn't really matter when you're dying to every hit. They needed to give this thing like Mach Punch or Ice Shard for it to have any sort of viability. They didn't, so it unfortunately does suck. That's it. Not much else to say there, right? Phalanx also going to go down here in D tier. These are probably the two worst fighting types in the game. Maybe in like the entire dex. It has a lot of potential with its cool move and no retreat, but you can only use it once, right? Before you're locked in, you can't switch out anymore, blah, blah, blah. So you can't like compound boost. And on top of that, its stats are terrible. As much as I love this thing's design, it's really not that good in that regard. So I think that's kind of what makes it unviable and holds it back and things like that. So yeah, I don't know. It's gonna go down here in D tier. Next up is Zamacrown, and this is an interesting one, right? I added this one to the list not because I think it should be allowed in draft. I actually don't. I know a lot of people this generation think, well, Zama got nerfed, its ability's worse, and it got stat nerfed. So therefore, it was borderline last generation. It should be allowed this generation because it's worse. I think the opposite, personally. I think it is broken this generation. I think it is better this generation simply due to the fact that it got access to Body Press. I think that makes the Pokemon incredibly overwhelming, especially if your league decides to allow you to Terra the Zamazenta. I'm going to go ahead and put Zama in S tier. It's going to be at the top, and I don't think it should be allowed. At least right now, maybe while this dex is a little bit smaller, it doesn't seem like there's consistent enough answers to this thing across the board for me to want to allow it. I don't know. Especially on like fat balance teams with a bunch of hazards and wish passing and, things like that. This thing can get so overwhelming so fast. I'm just not big on it. I don't think it's very good. personally, at least. Then we have Urshifu. Now, there's only one Urshifu, like, Gen 9 mini sprite. There's not one for both, so we can talk about both. Both of them are going in S tier regardless. They're both incredible. Urshifu Single Strike is borderline broken, and I would understand if your league has it banned. I personally don't have it banned. I think it shouldn't be allowed to Terra. I think Terra Urshifu with Sword Stance seems a little bit broken. I also think, though, that with Urshifu Single Strike, Sword Dance is going to get a little overused, in my opinion. Not that it's bad by any means, and not that, like, Sword Dance isn't rip in some matchups, but I think people are going to kind of forget that the whole reason Urshifu Single Strike was so broken is because it either, forcing the Fairy type, you get a U-turn into your breaker that punishes the Fairy type, or you get a bunch of hazards, and then it's in 2-hit range of banned anyways, or you just 2-hit or OHKO everything with Wicked Blow Close Combat. And that's basically how Urshifu became broken. I think when you take extra turns to set up and things like that, you're kind of missing out on the immediate power that Urshifu can have, and I think it functions much better as a breaker and facilitator than it does as an endgame win con and cleaner. Me personally, that's just like my prediction for the postal meta. I think people are going to super overuse Sword Stance variants and things like that, where, like, Banded and Scarf is just going to be its bread and butter still. It's still going to be so good. But both those Pokemon are great. With Urshifu Rapid Strike in particular, I do think Sword Stance is going to be great. And I think Sword Stance Punching Glove sets are going to be great because it's going to allow you to not be punished by Rocky Helmets with your Surging Strikes, or whatever other punching move you want to do. And it's going to power them up to the umpth degree and make it very, very strong. I think with Terra, Urshifu Rapid is going to be very good too. Definitely not half as broken as Urshifu Single Strike, like it's always been, unfortunately, but still very good nonetheless. Okay, next up we have Sneezler. I'm gonna make a prediction that Sneezler is going to be insane to deal with. Basically, whatever you're using to check this thing has to run a Covert Cloak, or it's just going to get poisoned, or parried, or burned, or slept, or whatever by Dire Claw / Poison Touch. It's going to be so obnoxious in that regard, right? Like Choice Band, Scarf, and Heavy Duty Boot sets are just going to U-turn around forever and get in their breakers and be very good at facilitating offense. Or Unburdened Sword Stance sets are going to go crazy, especially with Terra. I think Terra Flying Acro sets are going to go crazy. I think that Terra Ground sets, giving this in ground coverage, is going to be really nuts. Or just Terra Fighting it is going to be really, really scary for a lot of teams. Like, I really do think that Sneezler is going to be an absolutely brain dead broken Pokemon. It's going to be absolutely nuts. It might even be, I think where we have it is fine. I don't think it'll be better than Urshifu ever, but it's going to be really good. And when I say brain dead broken, I don't mean banded. I mean, it's just going to be really damn good. Okay, next up we have Quaquaval. I'm going to go and put Quaquaval on top of A tier. This is a Pokemon I have been dying to try. Big Quack. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to yet. Getting access to Moxie plus Aqua Step, its signature move, allowing it to boost its speed, makes this Pokemon have insane snowball potential. This thing can absolutely roll through a team if you give it the wrong KO at the wrong time. It does have access to Roost and a Rapid Spin as well. It can U-turn, it gets Brave Bird and Ice Spinner's great coverage on top of Water Fighting Stab, which is, as mentioned before, incredible in Urshifu Rapid and Keldeo. So this Pokemon is actually really, really good, and I really want to give it a shot. I just haven't been given the opportunity to. Next up, we have Palma. I'm going to put Palma in B tier. I see a lot. Ooh, definitely not this high, though. I'm going to put Palma in B tier. I think that Revival Blessing should be banned in draft. I think having a free revive on your team in a counter team format is really broken, personally. But I think that even without Revival Blessing, this Pokemon speed tier, offensive typing, abilities, and things like that make it incredibly solid. Kirby used it phenomenally last season in the BBR without Revival Blessing allowed, and I think that alone makes it much better than everything in C tier, on top of the potential of your league allowing Revival Blessing. If it allows Revival Blessing, it's still probably B tier. As a Pokemon, I think the move itself is like an S tier move. I think it's super broken, personally, but that's just me. Then we have Flamigo. Flamigo, mi amigo, as John would say, is going to go here in C tier, right behind Hariyama. I think it does what Persimmy kind of does, without Defiant, but being incredibly strong, it kind of does a mix, and no, this is Baby Gyarados, because this is Flying Fighting, I guess is a better way of putting it. No Defiant, but it does have access to Scrappy, so no immunities on those close combats, which means this Pokemon just clicks buttons non-stop. It U-turns around. Bandit and Scarf variants are going to be great. It's pretty one-dimensional in that regard, but I think those kinds of sets are going to be very good, and it's a very good Pokemon, so, not much complaining there. Next up, we have Great Tuskingtons. Great Tusk is going to go right here behind Urshifu. Now, if it was separate, like Urshifu Rapid and Single, this would be ahead of Rapid behind Single Strike, but, we don't have both. So, Tusk is the perfect glue piece Pokemon. There is not much that really can there's not much that this thing can't do, I guess is a better way of saying it. Whether it be bulk up variants, boost energy variants, scarf sets, band sets, physically defensive sets, as a rocker, as a spinner, spreading knockoffs. Whatever it might be, this Pokemon is going to do it really well, and it'll always complete the job you need it for your team. I love this thing in the BBR, and I would definitely recommend anybody giving it a shot. It is so unbelievably good. Okay, next up we have Slithering. I'm going to put Slithering in here, right here behind Quaquaval. I think this Pokemon, again, priority-wise, great. I think on Sun, it borderline becomes an S-tier Pokemon. With Terra, it can be incredibly obnoxious with Booster Energy plus like Terra Flying and Bulk Up and Morning Sun. But like we said, Burst Impression is great. It U-turns around forever. Bug Fighting is an incredible offensive typing, as we've established before with Heracross and Buzzwole. So I really like this Pokemon a lot, and I think it's a great offensive facilitator, especially on Sun teams. I think Slither is like damn near, it's not a requirement, but it should be on your radar 100%. So I'm huge on that Pokemon. Next up, we have Ironheads. Ironheads is also going to go up here in A tier. How do I want to do this? Do I want to put... No, I think this is fine. Ironheads, again, is just Hariyama, but on crack. This Pokemon doesn't get Bulk Up, but it gets Sword Dance. It has a second stab in Electric Fighting, which is a really good typing. It's crazy we didn't have any before. Now we have 2 of them this generation, but this one is definitely the better of the 2. Iron Defense Body Press sets are also really good. This thing with Terra is an absolute menace. Weakness Policy variants are also really good, I think, in my opinion. It gets great coverage. Like I said, Sword Dance. I think Booster Energy sets are great. I think AV is probably its best set, but Sword Dance and a bunch of stuff it can do, and it can do it really well. It functions well in Trick Room as well. Just a great Pokemon. And we have Iron Valiant. I'm going to go ahead and put Iron Valiant right here, assuming it's allowed to Terra. I think if it's not allowed to Terra, no, it's still probably had a great test. This Pokemon is crazy. Fairy Fighting is a ridiculous typing, especially with all this in coverage. It's incredible speed tier. Its ability to hit from both sides of the spectrum. It's an absolute nuke. Whether it be Scarf, Specs, Banded, Life Orb, Booster Energy, this thing really doesn't have much that it can't do. And if it is positioned well and it has proper momentum to get into it, it's an absolute nuke piece. Like, this Pokemon is great. So, yeah, really good overall. Next up, we have Annihilate. I'm going to put it behind Great Tusk. Personally, I would understand if you put it above it, but I'm going to put it below it. Now, in Free Terra, this thing is a monster, even in, like, limited Terra formats and things like that, as long as this thing can Terra. It is an S-tier Pokemon. Again, Bulk Up, Rage Fist, Taunt, Rest, Encore. It can even U-turn around set rocks if you're D-Ray, but in my opinion, if you're using Annihilate, 9.5 times out of 10, you're using the Bulk Up annoying sets with either Taunt or Resto Chesto, and you're winning the game because your moves get up to 800 base power, and you have insane bulk to back it up. This Pokemon, again, you want to talk about noob killer? This might be the biggest noob killer in all of Pokemon. The cheese and Mickey potential on Annihilate is absolutely batshit insane. Then, lastly, we have Hisuian Decidua. I'm going to go ahead and put it right behind Chestnut. I think Chestnut's a little better. This thing has a good, it's solid enough defensively, right? Let's see. I know it gets access to Defog as well, which is very solid. Scrappy is a good ability. Its a signature move in Triple Arrows is also really cool. Giving it 90 base power. It's a high crit chance, and there's a 50% chance to drop defense, and a 30% chance to drop, and a 30% chance to flinch if you are faster, which you're typically not going to be. But like, it might be one of the most overtuned moves of all time because it's 90 base power still. So that's a really cool aspect of this thing. It does get access to Sword Dance as well as a Bulk Up, which is good. It gets access to Roost for reliable recovery. It can U-turn around. And then again, close combat plus some kind of grass move. It can also rock out with like Trailblaze, I believe. Yeah, it can Trailblaze to boost its speed, so maybe you can get some flinches in that regard. It's overall a very solid Pokemon. I actually really like Hisuian Decidueye, and I want to give it a shot. The grass fightings are really fun, man. I really like all 3 of those Pokemon. So, and they're all 3 in the same tier too. So, yeah, that's going to be our fighting type tier list. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. Let me know what your favorite type, or your favorite fighting type is. And, yeah, that being said, drop a like if you enjoyed, sub if you're new, and big shouts to this month's channel members, Bick, Zeke, Goose, Liv, and Dell. Big shouts to you guys. I appreciate it a ton. And, yeah, with that being said, I will see you guys in the next one. Later.